Coming up, the word Orwellian has been overused since the publication of George Orwell's novel 1984. But we're currently living under an extremist populist government, and although the electorate haven't quite cottoned on to this yet, it's no longer politics as usual. In this video, we're looking at an entity at the centre of government called the Clearinghouse, and how it frustrates the objectives of the Freedom of Information Act. I'll be arguing that calling this government Orwellian is definitely justified. Keep watching. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like button, subscribe and get notified of future videos every Wednesday and Saturday. A little heard of department at the centre of government, the Clearinghouse is headed up by that most charismatic of politicians, Michael Gove. And I managed to keep a straight face as I said that. This Maverick Johnson government has just lost a legal battle to prevent the release of documents about the Clearinghouse, which has been accused of obstructing the release of material under the Freedom of Information Act. Yet another fantastic piece of legislation, which was passed under the much maligned Blair government. The Clearinghouse coordinates all the freedom of information requests submitted to the government by journalists, campaigners and even the general public, and advises the appropriate government department on how to respond to those inquiries. Back in 2018, our friends over at campaign group Open Democracy made a freedom of information request specifically about the workings of the Clearinghouse itself. But they declined the request, claiming they were exempt from the Act, and that, in any case, giving this information would not be in the public interest. The Information Commissioner's Office, the UK's independent authority set up to uphold information rights in the public interest, backed Open Democracy in this matter, but the government, as it so often does, decided to spaff large amounts of taxpayers' money on a legal appeal to a tribunal. A written judgment was passed down last week in which Judge Hughes backed the Information Commissioner, remarking that there was a profound lack of transparency surrounding the whole Clearinghouse operation, which seemed to extend to the dealings of cabinet ministers. Judge Hughes also stated that the department, headed, remember, by everyone's favourite politician, Michael Gove, had actually misled the tribunal. So can I just emphasise what the tribunal is saying here? That there is an entity at the heart of this Tory government that frustrates genuine freedom of information requests, that tries to cover up the activities of cabinet ministers, and that willfully misleads a legal tribunal investigating their function and actions. I mean, it just goes to prove what I'm saying about Michael Gove. He must be so popular and so charismatic, otherwise how could he have possibly kept his job in Johnson's cabinet? I mean, seriously, in any previous government, Labour or Tory, this guy would have been dismissed out of hand, along with all those other ministers who have broken the ministerial code. See our recent video on this subject. But I guess if Gove or any one of those other ministers fall on their sword, then the whole lot of them would have to go. Patel, Raab, Hancock, Shapps, Williamson, Jenrick, Truss, Sunak and of course Johnson himself. But back to Gove. Julian Richards, the Open Democracy editor-in-chief, said that freedom of information is being undermined at the very heart of government, that there is a toxic culture of secrecy and evasion that has to stop. He made the point that the Cabinet Office should be complying with basic transparency requirements without having to be forced to do it by a campaigning group. Judge Hughes took the Cabinet Office to task for offering an out-of-date 2013 Wikipedia entry as evidence that information about the Clearinghouse was available to the public. That was the last information ever released to the public about this clandestine unit. According to leaked internal emails and reported by The Independent, the Clearinghouse keeps a blacklist of people to be stonewalled every time they submit a Freedom of Information request, even though the process is legally required to be applicant blind. The list, by the way, features journalists from The Guardian and The Mirror, as you might expect, but also names of journalists from the right-wing media, including The Times, The Sun, The Daily Telegraph and the BBC. In February, editors of 6 UK national newspapers, including The Telegraph, signed an open letter requesting an urgent investigation into the Freedom of Information Act amid fears that the public are being stonewalled. Labour's Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Angela Rayner described the judgment as damning and reckons it's part of a government strategy to undermine accountability and transparency. And Tory MP David Davis says the government withheld important information about government activity from the public domain. So I started this video by referencing George Orwell, and I was echoing Michelle Stanistreet, who was the General Secretary of the National Union of Journalists. She described the unit as positively Orwellian because of its role frustrating access to information and making sure the Freedom of Information Act has effectively been cancelled without legislation or parliamentary scrutiny. In Orwell's 1984, information was a tool of power, and history was often literally rewritten. Inconvenient facts were erased and new ones added to suit the purposes of the present. This Tory government's Orwellian clearinghouse took this one step further and tried to ensure that inconvenient facts were never released in the first place. And despite Open Democracy's phenomenal legal victory, alongside the recent victories against government corruption by Joe Mom's Good Law Project, Gove and these other shysters remain in post. When are the electorate going to wake up to the fact that this is not politics as usual? This country is fast becoming an authoritarian Orwellian dystopia.